What's up, everyone? Welcome into another edition of the Round 6 recap. We didn't have a podcast on Friday before UFC 282, but we felt like it was only right to come on here and kind of break down everything that happened on the card because there is so much to unpack. We could go on for hours talking about the card and everything that happened, all the controversy, all the great things that we saw on Saturday. But nonetheless, it was a great card. Quick programming note. Can't really figure out what the deal is with our logo up here. So until further notice, this is a pro-Ukraine podcast. It is always a pro-Ukraine podcast, but now more than ever. So with that being said, Jake, I don't think I can think of a card in recent memory where there's so much to unpack. Not even the card itself, what happened after the card with what Dana said in the post-fight press conference. But let's just kind of start at the bottom of the card and work our way up. So we saw a lot of great fights. I think this card was trending more than a lot of other cards to end up as the card of the year, if not one of the best cards that I've ever watched. Tons of finishes. We didn't go to a judge's scorecard until the main card started, and that became the source of a lot of controversy. But let's kind of start at the bottom of the card, right? So Cameron Simon came out, started things off hot, 21 years old out of South Africa, in the bantamweight division. And, you know, we had that crazy parlay that we put out where he was the first leg. And he had a decent first round, kind of got held down a little bit, comes out in the second round, is fighting a great round, and then throws an illegal knee that I thought was going to completely derail us for the rest of the night. It would have absolutely ruined my night for that parlay to go down on the first leg.
But then, on the first one.
Yeah, but you texted me during that third round, or like right when it started, and you said, we need a finish here. And you're absolutely right, because you got a point taken away for that illegal knee. And what does Cameron Simon do? He comes out, lays on the pressure, and he gets a finish. Like, what a start to the night for the kid.
Yeah, I mean, that was absolutely huge. We had no chance of winning that fight, especially after the point was taken. Like, I assume the corner work more than likely informed him of that as well, saying something of the sort, like, you need a finish at this point. Like, there's no chance we're going to take home the decision. But, I mean, yeah, like you said, if we started out at the night with our minus 310 in the parlay as a loss, I mean, that would have just been terrible, especially seeing us just stack up win after win after win after that, through the prelims, I should say, at least. But,
yeah, and you've got to think, like, at least for me personally, I'm always nervous putting a bet down on a fighter who's making their UFC debut because, like, I bet there's, like, stepping into that octagon for the first time, especially on a numbered event, like, there's got to be a lot of jitters. You have to be nervous. There's just, like, there's no way you're not. Even if you're cool as a cucumber in the rest of your life, if there's one fight that you're going to be nervous for, it's making your debut on a numbered UFC event.
Oh, yeah.
And I don't think we necessarily saw a ton of those jitters come out. But you can't tell me that he wasn't, really trying to do well in that second round. Felt like he was fighting a good round, and then just, kind of out of a lack of caution, throws that illegal knee. And I thought we were buried. I was on my way to some of our friends' house to watch that fight card, and like, I was sulking for probably 5 or 10 minutes when that was going on because I thought we were dead. I thought we were dead in the water.
The first about minute or two of that, I guess you'd call it like wait time, healing time, whatever, stoppage, whatever. I didn't think they were going to continue the fight. I thought they were going to call it. It was looking like it was trending towards an Aljamain Sterling Oscar-winning performance for this fight can't continue anymore from a knee that you take 50 times during the fight anyway. But that's neither here nor there. He continued the fight, and we got the finish.
Yeah, I mean, it was a great turnaround. Like, I had the card pulled up on my phone watching the prelims and watching that fight when I was in the car. And when he got that finish, I literally started screaming because, like, we had, it was a crazy parlay. It was like plus 64,000. And even though there's not a great chance you hit that 9 legs later, like, just to get that first one out of the way was a win, especially the way that it happened. So, great fight all around. I think Cameron Simon is going to end up being a really big star in this company, but it was good to see him get that first win, especially, with all the circumstances around it, making his UFC debut. We have him in a parlay, and he gets the job done. It wasn't pretty. My heart rate was probably, like, over 200, but it worked.
Fine, so, we got it, though.
Yeah, so you can't be too mad about it.
Then a little later in the early prelims, our hammer, does it. Easy money, too. I mean, Billy Q, he was bloodied, but I would still say it makes it look pretty easy. The cardio is just unmatched in that division, I think. Like, Billy Q he's a quiet Colby Covington. He doesn't have that talk to him, so he's not kind of really a big star or anything. But I mean, that dude just goes for days. He takes damage, but if you don't put him away in round one, maybe early round two, like you're stuck with a pretty shitty last few rounds. He might just finish you in those last two.
Yeah, and he proved just that on Saturday. He took a ton of damage from a guy that you and I had all but written off when we were making our bets for this fight card. You know, I think you probably brought it up first, and I agreed with you. But we both thought Alexander Hernandez was trending down in the worst of ways, and we just didn't think that there was any way he was going to be in that fight. He was in that fight for the majority of the time it went on, and then Billy Q
Looked good for a little.
yeah, but Billy Q just stayed in there, chipped away, got some work done, and then found a finish. I mean, it's
You
what
got to
more
put
can
him
you ask
away.
for?
You got to put Billy Q away, or he's just going to keep that pressure coming. He's just going to put it on even more as the rounds go on, and it's people melt under that. Like his knockouts are usually from guys just melting to the pressure. Like, how is this guy still coming at me right now? Basically.
Yeah, and a lot of times in fights like that, when the guy who's losing the fight gets a finish, they don't necessarily take a lot of damage. Their opponent's probably up on the scorecards more so than anything else. But Billy Q was beaten and battered. Like some of the elbows that Hernandez landed, I mean, he was busted open. He was bleeding all over the place, and it just was nothing for him. It was like it felt like no adversity in that fight was going to be too much for Billy Q.
He landed that one in the closed guard and just absolutely split. Like you knew he was going to get split open. You watched that elbow connect, and you're like, okay, give him 40 seconds, and he's going to be just covered in blood. And he looked, just drenched in blood.
Yeah, but again, wasn't pretty for us. I would be lying if I said I wasn't nervous about that leg of the parlay. But
I would say,
again, he gets it done.
I would say most of our wins, other than Jairzinho Rosenstruik on that parlay in the first 7, none of them were pretty. Like none of them were easy wins. Chris Curtis, terrifying as we're moving on to next. Like that was not an easy win for us at all. That was another we need a finish here or this is not going to end our way.
Yeah, and to bring up Chris Curtis, I mean, what a call from, I think you were the one originally that said I like Chris Curtis in this one, and we rode with it. But what a call. Like coming into that fight as an underdog, I feel like a lot of times he's a guy that gets slept on, but the technique, like his boxing is so crisp. And I think for me, the story of Chris Curtis, a lot of times, it's kind of one of those cliche sayings that applies to a lot of sports. But, you know, they say the best offense is a good defense. And for Chris Curtis on Saturday, that could not have been closer to the truth. Like Joaquin Buckley, big dude, imposing figure. You know he's going to come out with, you know, all of his power in tow and try to put you away. But even though Joaquin Buckley was throwing a crazy volume of strikes, I think at one point they said he was on pace to throw over 300 strikes. There wasn't a lot getting through. Like, yes, he landed some shots, but if you go back and watch it, Chris Curtis has such a high guard that all of those shots were glancing off, and Curtis was just doing what he had to do until Buckley had kind of wore himself out a little bit, and then Chris Curtis lands a crazy left after he catches a kick. Like not only does he have crisp boxing, but like to catch a kick from a guy like Joaquin Buckley and then counter it speaks volumes about your ability as a striker all around.
Yeah, Chris Curtis didn't shock me whatsoever. Like, that was as expected. That's what I thought. Joaquin Buckley, on the other hand, he shocked me a lot. I didn't expect him to be that good. He was throwing just I expected him to have power and be coming for the knockout, but he was throwing just an enormous amount of enormous volume of strikes, I should say. Just so many. He just kept the pressure on, and it didn't look like it was going to wilt for a while. But like you said, Chris Curtis saw his opening to come with the offense, put it on him, and we got it. But I mean, Joaquin Buckley was scaring me. That was another one we desperately needed the finish.
Yeah, and I should have uploaded it. I didn't think about it until just now. But I think it might have been Verdict MMA that posted this picture. But there's a picture of Joaquin Buckley on his back right after Curtis lands that left. And Joaquin Buckley is like curled up on the ground. He looks like his face looks like he just got ran over by a truck. like Chris Curtis has a lot of power. Like he's a stocky dude, but like to land a shot like that on a guy as big as Joaquin Buckley and put him out the way that he did, like Chris Curtis, like the sky's the limit for him at this point. He's shown a lot in his last couple fights.
Yeah, he just needs to really be able to just put it together when it's a little bigger stage. He blew it in his last one, but I mean, he's got all the ability. I agree.
Yeah, absolutely. And then let's jump up a little bit further. Obviously, we saw some great stuff from Edmund Shabazian. Good to see him back in the win column. But let's talk about Jairzinho Rozenstruik and Chris Daukaus. I mean, good Lord. I think a lot of people were on Rozenstruik on this one just because of his power, and Daukaus is kind of trending down when he's going up against like really heavy-handed strikers as of late. But if you told me that this fight was going to be done in 23 seconds, like it wouldn't have necessarily surprised me, but I would have just been like, whoa.
Yeah, but, exactly.
Like Rozenstruik comes out, lands some good shots, has Daukaus on the ropes, and then the shot that he lands he didn't knock him out clean, but more or less like get him from, within an inch of being knocked out, basically. That shot was crazy. And like Daukaus just like he never had a chance to be in that fight. Rozenstruik just had him dead to rights from like the very first go.
Yeah, like I was a little bit high on Daukaus up until seeing these last two fights. He seems like he should probably at this point like be losing weight, be trying to move to the least light heavyweight, possibly. Like I just don't think he can compete with these like massive heavy-handed heavyweights. Like he's not like a Tom Aspinall. Like he's not this freak athlete that can move around and do all this stuff that a lot of the heavyweights can't, and that's where he imposes his will. He's not that great of a heavyweight, and I don't think he should even be in the division. Like I really don't.
No, and you beat me to the point on something that I was actually going to bring up too. I can't remember who said it, but it was someone. It might have been Derek Lewis. I can't exactly remember, but it was someone right after fighting Chris Daukaus. They asked him about Daukaus, and they brought up a really good point that, especially after this weekend, makes a lot of sense. But whoever it was said, just because you're 240 pounds doesn't mean you're a heavyweight. And if you think about it, that's so true. Like you brought up a good point about, Aspinall and there's other guys like Cyril Gane, even though Cyril Gane's huge, but Cyril Gane weight-wise is not necessarily topping out the scales in the heavyweight division. But unless you're one of those freak athletes that can get away with being 240-ish, 235, 240, I think Stipe in his prime fits into this equation somewhere. But we're almost seeing like a new generation of heavyweights come along where guys are cutting weight to get to 265, but they're just as quick, they're just as agile as some of the guys that are a lot lighter, but they have that extra power from being probably 270 plus on fight night. So yeah, I really think Daukaus, like, it's a big ask. I'm sure it's not easy to go from 240 pounds all the way down to 205 and make that weight. But here's a little bit of something to think about that I brought up to some of our friends on Saturday. If you think about that weight gap, right? So Daukaus weighed in at like 241-ish, I think, 241, 242. Alex Pereira makes 185 pounds on weigh-in day. When he steps into the octagon on fight night, and especially when he's walking around between camps, he's 220 pounds.
Easily.
There's only let that sink in. There's only a 20-pound difference between the middleweight champ, Alex Pereira, and Chris Daukaus, who fights at heavyweight. Yeah. So you got to think, if Daukaus moves down to 205, like it theoretically, it's in his reach. And if he moves down to 205, he's going to have so much power. And he's going to be fighting guys like Jan and some of your I don't want to say smaller guys because Jan's massive, but like you're going to have a weight advantage now instead of always being the guy that is at a weight disadvantage. And I think that would be beneficial for him.
And honestly, he wouldn't be that. I'm looking him up right now. He wouldn't even be that big of a light heavyweight. He's only 6'2".
Right, but from a weight perspective, because he could cut to 205 and end up being
not. Yeah, he just he just should really just be losing weight and be almost doing kind of the Jared Cannonier strategy. Like he could easily fight at middleweight, easily.
One would think. I mean, it's possible. Yeah.
Yeah, with his body type, easily for sure. He's big. Like just overweight. Honestly, there's nothing else to it. Looking at him, he's
Yeah,
just
and
overweight.
you kind of have to wonder, like, is a move like that in the cards for him? Is that something that him and his camp have thought about in the past,
I'm
and maybe
sure
now
they've
it's just
talked
time?
about it.
You got to think they have, right? Like, especially if you keep going up against these guys that are so much bigger than you, and you're consistently getting steamrolled. Like Curtis Blades steamrolled him, Derek Lewis steamrolled him. This past weekend, Jairzinho Rosenstruik steamrolled him. So, like, how many times can you realistically be willing to walk into the cage against someone who's 20 plus pounds heavier than you and get the same outcome, right? Like doing the same thing over and over again, but expecting a different result is the definition of insanity. So, like, I don't know. I just think it's the right move for him. I don't see how that, at least trying it, wouldn't be beneficial. But let's move on up to, in my opinion, the superstar of the prelims on Saturday night, Raul Rosas Jr. The kid's 18. He probably had class this morning, sitting, at a school desk somewhere. And on Saturday night, he was the talk of the town up until the main card started. But, I mean, an 18-year-old kid who, as I said earlier, you would expect to have some pre-fight jitters coming into that one. He's making the walk. He's wearing a sombrero. He's dancing. He's high-fiving the crowd. And he goes in there, and he gets on what was the guy's name that he was fighting? It's escaping me. He gets on Jay Perrin's back, and he submits him. He gets a finish. Like, this kid's the truth. He is real.
Yeah. I would have loved to see him stand and strike a little bit more, but, I mean, we'll see it in time. We got so much. It's not like we don't have time with this kid, Like, we're gonna see everything from him. He's 18 years old and already making his not just UFC debut, pay-per-view debut. And he was the featured prelim as well. So, like, he's got all the publicity was on him, basically. That is a huge spot because you got to think there are so many people that were watching that for free on ESPN because they're not going to pay for the pay-per-view and then maybe didn't even watch it. He just got so many eyes on him being in that spot. And yeah, like you said, no jitters whatsoever. Came in, looked amazing, ended up taking the back, getting the submission. Like, sky's the limit for this kid.
Yeah, and he really feels like one of those guys that we're going to see grow up in the UFC more so than anyone else in history. But, like, you think of all the guys that are, 33, 34, 35 right now, and they've been fighting since they were 20, 21. Mm-hmm. This kid's 18 years old, and I fully expect to see him around for the next decade, if not longer. So, like, think about if Raul
Charles
Rosas,
Oliveira, he came in the UFC at 21.
Perfect example, yeah. But think about, and even Charles Oliveira kind of followed the same trajectory. Think about how young he is right now and how much he could still learn in this sport through experience. Think about what Raul Rosas Jr. might look like in 10 years when he's 28, almost not even in his prime yet. We always talk about the prime age for fighters being somewhere in your early 30s, 30 to 33-ish. I mean, this kid could be here for a long time, and he could do a lot of special stuff, and I think it's in the cards for him.
Yeah, I totally agree.
But that said, let's move on to this main card. So the crazy, ridiculous, screw it parlay that we put out, 10 legs, cashed all the way through up until the main card opened. And not to say that I was on the edge of my seat just because we were 5 or 6 legs through, but I was feeling pretty good considering we had an underdog or two on the parlay and they had both already cashed. But let's talk about how good Ilia Topuria looked. I know Bryce Mitchell came out today, I believe, and said he had the flu. Probably should have pulled out of that fight. But to be quite honest, I don't see a world where even if Bryce Mitchell is healthy, he beats Ilia on Saturday night. And I almost don't see a world where if Ilia fights like he did on Saturday night, a lot of people in the featherweight division beat him. He looked unstoppable.
Now, I won't put him all the way at the top. You know how I feel about Volk. But
yeah, I agree.
Yeah, I agree. He looked pretty damn unstoppable, and I would love to see him get one of these upper echelon fights because, I mean, I know they're making a little BS little interim title for Josh Emmett, and who the fuck's Josh Emmett fighting? Yair?
Yeah.
Like,
I think
come
so.
on.
Yair,
nobody. There's nobody who thinks those two should be fighting for a title right now. So, I mean, I would love to see Ilia start making some headway in this division. Let's see him against. You got Max Holloway should be open. Calvin Kattar should be open. Brian Ortega should be open. Like, there's a lot of good guys in this division that it's now time for him to get that step up against, and I'd love to see it.
Yeah, he needs a big name, right? And I even think, like, no disrespect to Josh Emmett, he's an ultra vet. Like, he's so crafty in the octagon. He's really good at what he does. But I would almost be willing to argue that if Ilya and Josh Emmett were matched up and Ilya fought like he did on Saturday, I think Ilya wins that fight.
Oh, easily. I do too. I think if he fights that way against a lot of guys, he wins. Calvin Kattar, yeah, Max Holloway, it'd be tough. Like,
he's just like he's the perfect combination of power, speed, and takedown defense.
Grappling.
And he's got great grappling too.
That's what's underrated is he started his career 7-0, 7 submissions. His grappling is beyond underrated. So the fact that he can stuff the takedowns of somebody else, and also if he's fighting a striker, can get the takedowns and the submission, that's terrifying. He just didn't want to play this fight with Bryce. Like, that's the whole thing. He just didn't want to fight that way.
Well, and he stuffed every single takedown Bryce threw at him, except for maybe one. But Bryce was shooting from distance, so it's not like they were hidden and he was having to really kind of dissect what's a takedown and what's a feint. But like some of these takedowns that he stuffed, like Ilya's doing everything right from a technique standpoint, right? Like he throws the hip out there, almost makes Bryce just completely face plant into his hip, gets the top of his feet on the canvas and just slides and lets him run with it. Like, I don't care how deep in you are on a single. If someone's sprawling like that, you're not taking him down. It's impossible.
Yeah, and like Bryce said, he was sick, so maybe that plays into he doesn't have the power on the shots. He doesn't have all that. But, I mean,
I just don't think it matters. If Ilya's fighting like that, I don't think
it didn't look like it mattered anyway.
No, not at all. But let's keep on going up the card here. I think everyone in the fight world wanted to see Darren Till succeed this weekend. Even though the fight didn't go his way, I think Darren Till doesn't lose any stock there because that first round, he just, like, it was such a weird round. Like, Dricus gets on his back and starts just raining down shots. And Darren almost seemed more content to sit there and take him as long as he was telling the ref he was okay instead of defending.
That's the whole thing.
And trying to get up. Like, it was just a weird round the way that it played out. But
you got to think he's hoping Dricus just gasses, though. Like, you got to think
he did.
He's willing to survive just to take the gas out.
Yeah, but it almost worked completely in his favor because if you go into the second round, Dricus was gassed. Darren was by far the fresher fighter. And Darren had his moments to where he could 100% win that fight in the second round. So
just didn't close the show.
Yeah, it just didn't go his way. And then I agree with Dana in the post-fight press conference. He said in that third round, he didn't think that the submission was necessarily what broke Darren Till and made him tap. That takedown from Dricus was pretty outrageous. Like, to pick Darren Till up and slam him that heavy, I think that broke him more than the submission.
I think it was that, and it was the size and everything, and it was. I agree with if you watch Dricus in the press conference, he says Darren Till cannot compete with middleweights. He just can't compete at this level against these guys. He's not big enough, and in that third round, Dricus made him or let him know that basically with that takedown. Like he said, "Little man, I'm going to put you right where I want to put you," and that's exactly what he did. Like he said, 3 rounds in, I'm going to pick your ass up and put you right here. And Darren's got to cut. He's got to go back to 170.
Yeah, it seems to be
he could be a champ at 170. I don't think he's a top 10 fighter at 185.
No, and it sucks because I think when he first moved up to 185, everyone thought, like, man, this guy's going to go on a run because he looked so good at 185. And then all of a sudden he didn't. Like his body composition looked good at 185. I guess I mean
people in the higher end of that weight class cut way too much weight. Paulo Costa, Alex Pereira, Dricus Duplessis. Duplessis says he weighs 220 on fight night. He's fucking huge. I mean, that dude is massive. Huge. Like, it's the size discrepancy is just way, way, way too much. Darren, when he is in shape, can make 170, and that's what he should be doing.
Yep, I completely agree. But yeah, so let's jump on into Santiago Ponzinibbio versus Alex Morono. So
Almost called it.
I know, right? I actually was not keen to the fact that Alex Morono was taking this fight on 5 days' notice when we put this as a bet. Even though it was so obvious that Robbie Lawler pulled out, it did not cross my mind once for whatever reason. But you called it. You were like, Morono is one of those guys that's sneaky in this division, and Jeff Neal, his teammate, just fought and beat Ponzinibbio. So the Fortis camp has more or less a blueprint for how to do it. And he was, 3 minutes, I think, away from pulling it off. He had already banked 2 rounds going into that third round.
Easily won the first 2.
Yeah, and then like 2.5 minutes into round 3, gets knocked out. I looked at some of our friends that I was watching the card with when round 3 started, and I said, boys, we've already got 2 rounds in the books. We just need to survive. That's all we need. Because we also had a straight bet. One of our picks of the week was Morono. So all we needed to do was survive. And we just couldn't do it.
Yeah, and that's a lack of having a training camp. Like a chin is not just your chin. Like, it's not just, like, can you take a punch? When you're in really good shape, you can hang in there a lot longer. Like, guys that are in amazing shape, you almost never see get knocked out. I was going to say Kamaru Usman, but he just did. You never used to see Jorge Masvidal. It was one of those guys, never gets knocked out. Colby Covington doesn't really get knocked out. Like, these guys that have gas tanks, Darren Elkins, another one. Like, the guys that are known to go for days just don't get dropped. Max Holloway, another one. Like, they don't go down. So having only 6 days to prepare for this fight, sure, he had all the skill. He had everything he needed to know about Ponzinibbio, and he banked it in for 10 minutes. He didn't have anything left in him to even have a chin for the last 5 minutes. So, I mean, that's where it sucks.
Yeah. Yeah, and like we said, all we needed to do is survive. Like, you don't necessarily have to go out there and fight your ass off and win round 3, even though that seemed like what Morono was trying to do. But he had Ponzinibbio hurt several times throughout that fight and was doing exactly what he had to do. So to almost call that for a guy taking that fight on 5 days' notice is pretty impressive. And I feel like even though that bet doesn't hit, we still got to feel pretty good about the work that Morono did at plus money. And it felt like a lot of our bets were that way, right? Like, it seemed like a lot of our bets this weekend, with the exception of maybe Bryce Mitchell, were so close to hitting. Like, Darren Till absolutely had his moments in the second round. Alex Morono had his moments throughout the fight and just needed to get 2.5 minutes longer to win that fight. So, like, we were right there on a lot of these picks. It just didn't turn out our way, and that's just kind of the way fighting goes. You know, it is what it is.
And, it's a good transition into the next one because I refuse to believe this one shouldn't have gone our way. Like, and 91% of people, when you go to Verdict MMA, also agree with us that this one should have gone our way when we picked Jared Gordon to win this fight. And there's no way that you can ever justify giving Paddy Pimblett the win here. It makes absolutely zero sense. You look at the global judging on Verdict, it makes absolutely zero sense that Paddy wins this fight. I have no idea who gives Paddy rounds 1 or 3. Makes no sense, but most of the judges did give Paddy round 1. So, like, I just don't get it. I don't get it at all.
Yeah. Well, and my big issue with this, and to me, it's blatantly obvious Jared Gordon wins that fight. Like, that's cut and dry. There's no way Paddy wins that fight. But my big issue, and it's not, the judges aren't Dana White, and Dana White isn't a judge. So this is kind of an unrelated thought. But when Dana got on the mic for the post-fight press conference, I took so much exception to a lot of the things that he said about that fight. Dana said, he goes, Jared Gordon had a terrible game plan going into round 3. If you think you've already got 2 rounds in the bank, why would you go out there and just press this guy up against the cage and just try to survive and not go out there and try to win the fight? Well, like, yes, there is a little bit of merit to that. Like, sure, you'd want people to go out there and win the fight. That's an absolutely horrible take from Dana because he very well could have had rounds 1 and 2 in the bank, but he's not necessarily fighting like that. He's going out there in round 3 saying, all right, I have to do my part to get control time. I'm going to go grapple. I'm going to go try to wrestle, get a few takedowns. And to me, even though that's not exciting, and I think Dana is upset about that because, oh, it's not exciting. Oh my gosh, it's not trending on Twitter. Who gives a shit? Jared Gordon's doing what he has to do to go out there and win that fight. I don't care who you are. If you're a fighter, your job is not to go out there and to be exciting. Even though a lot of guys like Michael Chandler's of the world and some of those folks, like they take it upon themselves to be exciting. If you're a fighter, your job is not to go out there and be exciting. Your job is to go out there and win fights. And Jared Gordon did everything he had to do to win that fight, and he got absolutely robbed. Like if you had told me, what was it, 2 months ago when the Peter Yan and Sean O'Malley fight happened, which was a decision that I disagree with, even though going back and watching that fight, I think you can make a case that O'Malley wins that fight. But I still to this day disagree with that decision. If you had told me following that fight that just wait, here in a couple months, there's going to be a judge's decision that's so much worse than what you just watched, I would have been shocked. And that's exactly what happened. Like that decision is one of the most brutal decisions I've ever seen as a fan of this sport.
So here's something that really just needs to be looked at this point. Like I know we're investigating, or not we, but I know the UFC and law enforcement, whatever, is investigating James Krause and all that kind of stuff. At what point are we going to investigate the judges? So there was a judge last night he was one of the judges who scored for Patty in rounds 1 and 3.
Yep, Doug Crosby is. I already know what you're about to say. Doug Crosby is his name.
This judge,
let's air it out.
48 hours ago, scored the Bellator.
But less than that, 24 hours ago. Bellator was Friday, UFC Saturday.
I'm talking about from right now. But
oh sure, yes,
24 hours or less than 24 hours before scoring the Paddy Pimblett fight for Paddy, he scored Danny Sabatillo 50-45 in a loss. That has never happened. There has never been a 50-45 given in a loss, especially in a title fight. And this happened less than 24 hours beforehand. Like, that is absolutely egregious. That makes no sense at all.
Yeah, and you want to know what the worst part about that Danny Sabatello 50-45 and a loss is? I watched that fight, and there were probably 2 rounds that I can think of where I don't think Sabatello landed a punch. Like, he didn't land one single punch. How in the hell do you give him both of those rounds, let alone all 5? It makes no sense.
Idea. Like some people say that some of these judges are just doing it because they think it's what the promoter wants. You score rounds to stay in good graces of the promoter, not of the athletic commission, not of the fighters, but of the promoter. And I think that's exactly what this judge is. Like, the fact that he was even allowed to judge makes no sense at all either. Like, there was no reason he should have even been allowed to be judging that fight. Like, how do you have a clear head after flying, after judging who knows how many fights during Bellator the night before? Like, if referees in all these other sports have rules where they can't do back-to-backs, like, why is this man allowed to fly across the country from Mohegan Sun to Las Vegas and judge another fight in a co-main event?
Yeah, absolutely. And, to me, there's one clear answer to the judge or the lack thereof, the bad judge issue that we have in MMA, and that's to use Verdict. Verdict MMA seems to always get these fights right. If I'm watching a fight and in my head, I'm scoring it throughout the fight and we get to a decision and I say, oh, okay, I'm pretty certain that this fighter won the fight. Whether they win or not, I pull up my phone, I go to Verdict MMA on Instagram, and 99.99% of the time, Verdict and I are in agreement. It feels like Verdict almost never gets a fight wrong. And they also weigh in a ton of different factors. They weigh in how competitive you were, even in a round that you lost. They weigh in the damage that you did. You might have lost 3 rounds in a 5-round fight, but were you more dominant? Were you more aggressive? Did you do more damage in the 2 rounds that you won? And all of that stuff plays in. It's a way more inclusive scoring system than the 10-round bust system that we're used to here in the UFC and boxing and all of these other combat sports. So to me, the clear answer to solving all of these issues with scoring and bad judging is to use Verdict MMA.
You absolutely cannot be sticking to a boxing 10-point scoring system. It's beyond different sport. it just doesn't make sense that we haven't adapted rules based off of boxing. Like it never made sense to me, and it's something that just has to be fixed at this point. Judges need better integrity. Our scoring system just needs to be better.
Yeah, and just to touch on the verdict scorecard for the Patty and Jared Gordon fight, just because like I respect Verdict a lot. I've followed them for a while. I think they're great. If you pull up Verdict scorecard, they give Jared Gordon round 1, they give Patty round 2, but only just. They gave Patty round 2 by .02 points. So it's damn near an even round, but they gave Patty just barely round 2. And then they give Jared Gordon round 3 by a sizable margin. So it's a clear 29-28, if not a 30-27, depending on how you score round 2. I'm just saying what Verdict had. So, like, how on earth do 3 judges give a unanimous decision to Patty Pimblett? And like it's not like, you know, fans out here are just mad because like, oh, we scored it different. There's experts in this sport that are just as mad. Like, there's a video going around of someone taking a video from the crowd of the decision when it gets announced, and Joe Rogan's face when Bruce Buffer says Patty Pimblett says it all. Like, Joe's standing over there, he's like pretty certain Jared Gordon won, and they say Patty Pimblett, and Joe's just like
he's like, "Ooh, don't know about that one."
Like, and even I was watching a clip that Daniel Cormier put out on his YouTube a little while ago talking with Ben Askren, and even Daniel Cormier said that Rogan came back to the desk after interviewing Patty and said, that kid believes you won all 3 rounds. He thought it wasn't even a close fight, talking about Patty Pimblett. It's shocking that Patty would think that, and like, I get some of it's the showmanship. You're trying to promote yourself. Yeah, if you're trying to be cocky and, you know, be who you are and who your personality is, like, yeah, you'd probably say that on the mic. But like, I'm almost of the belief that Patty like truly believes in his mind that he won that fight and he won it handily. Like, he needs a reality check. Like, you're not right in the head if you think you won that fight, because you absolutely lost that fight.
And that's not going to do him any justice either. Like, I like the fighter that acknowledges, like, damn, like, that was a close fight. Like, that was really tough. Like, that was a lot more than I was expecting. And you learn in those instances. It's like, okay, I wasn't prepared for him to do blah, blah, blah. I wasn't prepared for blah, blah, blah. Like, I know what to get better at now. It's like, if you don't actually think that and you don't actually see what you need to go back to the drawing board and fix, then how do you like expect to improve as a fighter? And like, I'm looking at the rankings right now. You want to talk about Patty Pimblett even touching the top 15? Like, fuck no. Like, there's not anybody in this top 15. Like, absolutely not. Put him against number 12, Damir Ismagulov, and let's see how Patty Pimblett looks after that. Like, I think he'll quit MMA. Like, there's no chance. Then you want to talk about the actual top 10. You're looking at Jalen Turner as the easiest guy. Like, you're screwed when you enter in the top 10. Like, this is a murderer's row. Patty has no chance. And even if he wants to lose some weight, go down to featherweight, no chance at all.
Yeah, like, Patty's barking up the wrong tree with all this shit talk with Ilya. Like, Ilya brutalizes Patty, and he's a weight class below him. But yeah, I think you're absolutely right. If nothing else, this fight just proved to the world that Patty Pimblett does not have what it takes to be at the top of that division. Like, do I like Patty? Yeah. Do I enjoy watching him because he's entertaining? Yeah. But if he thinks that he's ever got a chance without making a drastic amount of changes in his game to be at the top of that division, like, you're sorely mistaken. Like, your chin is way too high up in the air every time you come into the pocket. His grappling honestly hasn't looked super spectacular. And you just like you mentioned Jalen Turner. He doesn't stand a chance against Jalen Turner, but obviously every fighter's goal is to go out there and win the title. You think Islam Makhachev is going to fall to Patty Pimblett? No shot. You think Michael Chandler is going to fall to Patty Pimblett? No shot. You want to throw Dustin Poirier in there? He throttles Patty Pimblett too. Like, he doesn't have a chance. There's no division in the UFC where Patty Pimblett is going to be at the top of the division anytime soon.
Not at all. I'm happy with him to just be a Nate Diaz type of fighter. Just be
he's going to be an entertainer. He's going to sell some pay-per-views. That's great. You know, make your money and get out, kid, because if you don't get out soon enough, you're going to, like, be a vegetable, more or less. Like,
totally agree.
He just doesn't have it. But I think that's a great transition into the main event, I should say. And you brought up a good point about, everyone respects fighters that are humble more, that accept losses, and just do their part to learn from their experiences in the octagon, which is something that we didn't see from Patty on Saturday. There's a guy that I don't think gets enough respect in the UFC for the way that he carries himself. And we saw it on Saturday night, and that man is Jan Blachowicz. At the end of the main event, Jan Blachowicz, they get the decision that it's a draw, and Ankalaev is pissed off and made some pretty weighty comments when he was interviewing with Joe Rogan. Jan Blachowicz walked over to Joe Rogan and said, "Give Magomed Ankalaev the belt. He won that fight." Like, imagine the balls it takes to do that on a pay-per-view in an arena with 30,000. Well, that's probably not too many. 20,000 people in it. Like, Jan Blachowicz has all the respect in the world from me, and it just couldn't be a more polar opposite personality and a more polar opposite mentality from a fighter than that of Paddy Pimblett. But I digress. Let's talk about the fight. I think I might be the only one that's able to talk about this fight because one of the two of us may or may not have fallen asleep before it happened. It's neither here.
Something just pissed me off about the Gordon fight, I guess, and I was like, you know what, done.
Yeah, no, I can't blame you.
I just dropped on the couch.
But realistically, with this main event, there's a lot to unpack. I think it was a good fight, contrary to what some people in the UFC organization might have come out and said after the card, and we'll get to that in a minute. But I thought both fighters had their chances to win that fight. I thought it was an exciting fight. But really the thing that's kind of the question at hand is the scoring, right? So round one, super close round. Round two, I think Jan Blachowicz wins that round. Round three, Jan Blachowicz does a lot of damage, but Magomed Ankalaev lands a lot. So that's a tough round to score. Round 4 and 5, Ankalaev is just absolutely dominant, right? So the rounds that are tough to score are 1 and 3. The way I looked at it was round 1 was super close, but Ankalaev landed a bunch of good kicks up the middle. I felt like he was a little bit more effective, a little bit more efficient, so I would have given round 1 to Ankalaev. I think Jan Blachowicz wins round 2. That's pretty obvious. Round 3, Blachowicz does great work with the leg kicks, just a great game plan from him. And there were several moments in the third round where I thought Ankalaev wasn't going to be able to stand anymore, let alone continue this fight. So I thought he was basically done. But in that round, Ankalaev also landed a good amount. That said, I would still give round 3 to Jan based on damage. Round 4, Ankalaev completely changes the game plan, overcomes the adversity, puts Jan on his back, and just grinds him out the rest of the round. I would have given that round to Magomed Ankalaev. So here we are. It's 2-2 going into the 5th round. Magomed Ankalaev does the same thing. Within 30 seconds, puts Jan on his back, starts raining down punches, raining down elbows, and I think it was a pretty clear 10-8 round. So personally, I kind of go two ways on this, right? I think at worst, it's a draw. I'm not mad about it being a draw. I think a draw is a fair decision. I can definitely see an argument where a draw is the right call. But I think round 1 goes to Ankalaev. I think round 4 goes to Ankalaev. And I think he gets a 10-8 in round 5. So I also see an argument where Ankalaev wins that fight. But again, the bigger issue at hand is not, what was it a draw? Did Ankalaev win? It's the scoring. If you go back to verdict and you looked, there are so many rounds on the verdict scorecard that were completely different from or not completely different, I shouldn't say, but different from some of the judges. Like one judge scored it a draw, one judge scored it for Ankalaev, one judge scored it for Blachowicz. The judge that scored it for Blachowicz, I don't understand. I really don't. Like I don't think it's fair to say Blachowicz won that fight, especially with how it turned out in the 4th and 5th rounds. But I think the bigger thing to talk about here, and this is something that you'll be able to speak to, Jake, even without watching the fight, and this is a tweet, or I think it was an Instagram post that I sent you the other day. What really made me mad about this was Dana in the post-fight press conference. I didn't think that fight was boring at all. I thought it was a really fun fight to watch. A lot of different strategies employed between the leg kicks and the wrestling from Ankalaev, which is something we haven't really seen from him before. But what made me mad was Dana saying immediately, that was a boring fight. The main event sucked. Just trashing, dragging both of these guys through the dirt after they just laid it all out there for the world to see. And then immediately when he gets asked, what's kind of the situation with the light heavyweight division, he immediately comes out and says, you do Glover Teixeira versus Jamal Hill in Brazil. And that's not something we ever see from Dana. Anytime the night after a fight, someone asks him about what's next for the division, Dana says, we'll see what happens when we get there on Monday. I don't make fights the night of a fight. So that's weird. And Jamal Hill comes out today and says, the UFC called me so fast. I don't even think Ankalaev and Blachowicz were out of the cage when I was on the phone with the UFC booking that fight.
He said he put down the phone, looked up, and Ankalaev was about to walk out of the cage.
It's ridiculous, right? So, like I hate that because it really seemed like, and this was a post from Full Violence that I completely agree with, but that fight wasn't boring at all. But for Dana to get up there and say that was a boring fight, let's move on from it, and just throw both of these guys to the wind is so disrespectful because how many of the big names in the sport have we seen have lackluster fights, right? I think the Full Violence post named
He's never done this about Israel.
Israel had several lackluster appearances. Yeah, no, it did, 100%. Yeah, but Dana never does that because those guys are stars. But you get two guys like Ankalaev and Blachowicz who might not sell as many pay-per-views, and he does everything in his power to get them out of the picture as soon as he can and get people who might be able to bring like a little bit more marketability to the fight game in that division. I hated that.
Oh, let's bring – I mean, I love it. Like, Glover deserves to have his title.
And I love Jamal Hill, too.
Like, it's perfect. But, yeah, it's just like you were saying. Let's move on from this and let's try and now upsell this new one. It's like, yeah, cool, that's business. I get it. But, yeah, it's disrespectful.
Like, and I'm not a conspiracy theorist, but if you're a conspiracy theorist, and especially one that's not a fan of Dana White, it's pretty easy to make an argument that the co-main event and the main event were the best case scenario for the company and that the company was somehow involved in that, right? It doesn't help the company financially at all if Jared Gordon wins that fight. I don't think it was a close fight, but the judges seem to think it was a close fight. They give it to Paddy Pimblett. So wrong, but it makes all the sense in the world for the business. Mm-hmm. For the UFC.
Magomed doesn't help the business.
Magomed doesn't help the business, and neither does Jan Blachowicz. And somehow this fight gets called a draw, so both of them can be forced out of the picture.
Jan kind of does. Jan's a good story for Yuri, because there's already the rivalry there with Yuri. And he's a great story with Glover. That's why it just never made sense that this fight happened to start with. I agree that this could have been, not conspiracy, but like...
It's interesting. It raises some eyebrows.
Because it's like, maybe at one point it's like, why did we even make this fight? It's like, everybody wants to see Glover versus Jan. Like, that should have been the fight to make. Everyone just wants Glover getting this title shot. What are we going to do? Glover versus Magomed now? Like, no, that doesn't have anything. There's no setup to that.
But yeah, nonetheless, I think the main thing that we learned from Saturday is Paddy Pimblett not ready to take on the top lightweights in the world. And I think we learned, above all else, that the judging situation really needs to get figured out because it's really unfortunate for a card trending in such a good direction like it was on Saturday. Tons of finishes. It just seemed like it had the makings of one of the best cards of the year, but it will go down in history as the card that was ruined by the judges. The last two fights were just completely ruined by judging, in my opinion, and I think a lot of people would agree with that. So super unfortunate, but all in all, I think it was a fun card to watch, but it just sucks that it ended the way that it ended. I went home on Saturday just feeling really let down by the sport. And, as a UFC fan, I feel like we pride ourselves in being the best combat sport in the world and being fans of the best organization that does combat sports in the world, and I really feel like they let us down.
Who knows? Maybe this could be our turning point card. Like, maybe this could be the one it's like, wow, that was so fucking bad, they need to change something. So that's the only hope we can really take from this. Yeah,
let's hope so. Let's hope this is turns into a positive, I guess, for lack of better terms. But yeah, I think that about wraps us up. A lot to unpack there, a lot that just needed to be said. I feel like I would not have felt right unless we got on here and just talked about some things because I had a lot to rant about, if you could not tell.
For sure.
So I think the round 6 recaps are here to stay. I love talking about the cards after the fact. Especially when you have a card like that. So
we got a while till another.
I know. We got one more fight night this coming weekend, and then we're off for like 3 weeks. It's going to be a brutal 3 weeks.
It's the worst. I specifically remember last year's when this happened. Like, I didn't know what to do with myself for 2, 3 weekends in a row. It was awful.
Yeah, well, lock in because we're here for it. It's going to
Yeah.
happen. So it's unfortunate, but it is what it is. Maybe Bare Knuckle or someone will have a card that we can go and just binge for a little bit.
Need it.
But without further ado, I think that about wraps us up here. That's another edition of the Round 6 recap. Make sure you go follow us on Instagram. Subscribe to the YouTube page. This will be posted on Spotify when this comes out tomorrow. So thank you guys for tuning in. We hope you love the content. Let us know what content you guys would want to see. Shoot us a DM on Instagram. We'll probably put out a poll sometime before the new year, just trying to figure out what you guys are wanting to watch more of and hear more of as far as our takes go. But nonetheless, that's another edition of the Round 6 recap. From me and Jake, you guys have a good one.